Welcome back. I'm talking to Gary McKinnon about the fact that he accessed NASA computers and other defense establishment computers in America and witnessed some very interesting information. When did the mainstream media get hold of it for the very first time?
2002, the initial arrest.
Right, so that was in the mainstream media.
Yeah, there was a peak then. Yeah.
Right, and then another peak in 2005.
Yeah.
So it seems grossly unfair that they can pass a new agreement or treaty and apply it to something
retrospectively, and that was in the wording of the treaty. This is retrospective as well.
Right, but they still were attempting to do that. Now, here's another devil's advocate question then, Gary. Wouldn't you think that they would try and keep it low-key? So, in other words, say to the British intelligence equivalent, look, we want this kept out of the media, and I'm quite convinced that on issues like this, if they wanted it kept out of the media, they probably could keep it out of the media with D-notices if they wanted to.
Yeah.
So I asked the question, do you think it was deliberately made into a big mainstream media issue at the request of the Americans?
Well, in America, there was no media. They were definitely keeping it quiet over there, or they just hadn't heard of it.
Right.
But there was almost zero coverage in America.
Because here's another possibility, and again, I'm just exploring it as a possibility that they've looked at what you've seen, they've thought, okay, it's not massively damaging, so let's let it out into the media as a not a diversion, but as a look over here, we've got other stuff over there. Do you see what I mean? So
yeah, well, no, you're right. Because also we have to remember at that time, that was, long before Anonymous and all that. That was the growth of hacking, big time, starting in the UK anyway. And it was the first time there was a sort of global awareness that this could be a problem. People like this could be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there may have been the idea that, well, if we get this one guy and do a great big show trial and make sure everyone knows about it, that'll scare off every other possible person in the future. So
it allows them to be more draconian with their legislation, maybe, by trumpeting one case and making an example of it, rather than making an example of you because you found something sensitive.
Yeah. Well, there was one guy, a journalist I don't trust very much because he never paid me for my interview in the end. I was on the dole, and he said, "Oh, I'll give you 200 quid, you tell me all about your story." I won't mention his name because it could be libel. But he said that he'd gone over there and interviewed the top brass, and they said that the main thing was embarrassment. But I don't actually believe that. I don't trust that journalist. But one journalist did say that.
Right. And other than that, have you had any other clues as to the reason? That's the only thing you've had?
Yeah,
because to the real why they're upset over it.
Yeah, I mean, very strangely, the UFOs weren't really mentioned very much in the media. I mean, I did end up being called the UFO hacker, which is good because the Americans were trying to get me called the 9/11 hacker because it was, they say before, during, and shortly after 9/11, he was hacking into our security, as if. I don't know, as if not that I had something to do with it, but as just that emotional attachment. They use 9/11, even to this day, they use 9/11 to bring emotions out. And,
Now, you've done quite a lot of media interviews, Gary. One of them was the Richard and Judy show. You were quite petrified to go on that show, I believe.
I was terrified because Richard and Judy were a big thing back then, and I really don't like being on camera. I don't know if you can tell, I'm nervous even now after all these years. But I had to do it to raise awareness of the extradition treaty, its unfairness, and the fact that I didn't do any damage, and there's no way it should be such a huge thing.
Right. No, one thing I picked up on that, because I watched it on YouTube the other day, is Richard Madeley said that your best friend, John Ronson, he made some reference to John Ronson.
Yeah.
So can you tell us, do you know John Ronson well?
No, not at all. He did the first interview, I think, in The Guardian.
Right.
Yeah, I think that was the first interview. And John Ronson's style is a bit humorous. He doesn't really take his subjects very seriously.
He's condescending.
Okay, yeah.
In my opinion.
No, he is. And he did actually put words into my mouth and then wrote them. Like when he was talking about the damage, I said, well, I know I didn't do any damage. He said, yeah, but maybe you pressed the wrong button. I said, well, maybe, but I don't think so. But in the interview, he said, oh, yeah, and Gary said maybe he pressed the wrong button. So that angered me. So, no, we certainly weren't best friends.
Right.
But,
so how many times did you meet him?
Oh, once.
Right. So on Richard and Judy, I think, I'll need to check this, but I think they described him as your best friend or a close friend.
That does ring a bell.
Even your staunchest defender, a guy called Mr. Ronson, who writes for The Guardian, John Ronson. I mean, he says that there's no way are you a threat to the American system or the American defence system, but you're just a computer nerd who went too far. That's what he says, and he's your best friend. Is that fair?
Right, you say that.
So that's really strange why they would say that, because if I was to say what I think of John Ronson now, it wouldn't get broadcast.
Right.
He's, well, I
you can't say it.
I can't say it. Well, thanks for clearing that up, Gary, that you were interviewed by John Ronson.
Yeah.
So that clears that up for me. So you've obviously had a lot of interaction between various officials at the Home Office and other organisations. Just tell me a bit about what you learned about the Home Office, Gary.
What I learned about the Home Office was that I think the older crew in the Home Office have strong links with Washington, and they're very eager to please. But I think the younger up-and-coming members are more, Britain is a sovereign nation, and we control what we do. Well, I think they'd like it to be that way. Some of them, not all of them. But I also found or heard that, and this is from a very reliable source, that officials from Washington are walking around the Home Office telling people what to do.
Right.
Which is just not on at all.
It doesn't surprise me, that. And the BBC, you've also got opinions on the BBC?
Yeah, I think they were quite unfriendly to me at first. Not because I did a few interviews with the BBC, and I don't think the individual producers, although I did have one fairly unfriendly interview, I can't remember her name now, but I think maybe the executive producers have an agenda to push and didn't like me at first until they realised the tide was turning when the Daily Mail campaign started taking off, and then thought, well, this looks like this guy might win in the end, so now we'll start being more friendly. But I think if they had their way at first, I think they would have.
So what do you think it was that changed then, that went from them absolutely wanting you extradited to then dropping the extradition request? What was the reason for all that?
Well, why did Theresa May? Because the request wasn't dropped, Theresa May just refused it.
All right, she refused it. Okay. But my opinion of Theresa May is she's not making her own independent decisions. I would guess that Washington have told her to do that. That would be my hunch.
Well,
that it's not been an independent to America.
I heard, again from reliable sources, that at one point there was a plane waiting for me, one of those special planes that go to Turkey and Jordan now and then.
All right.
And that Theresa May was going to give my extradition the go-ahead. But, because I think they do make individual decisions to a certain extent,
right.
But obviously they all have advisors. But I think the Home Secretary is a very, very special position, unless you're Alan Johnson, who was rubbish at his job, and he admitted that himself. He said, I'm just a hack politician. But I think in the end, it did seem to be the medical evidence that did swing her mind. She realised that it was a terrifying position for me. And I'd bought potassium chloride to kill myself rather than go on that plane and go over there.
Right. So when you say the medical evidence, you were diagnosed with, is it Asperger's?
Yeah, by the 5 top people in the land. Yeah.
Right. It's not something I really know much about. I mean, I don't know whether you want to talk about that aspect of it, Gary. Do you want to mention anything about that?
Yeah, well, it's apparently I wasn't on the high end of the spectrum. I've met some people with autism that really need looking after. They can't function on their own, So they called mine high-functioning Asperger's or high-functioning autism.
Yeah. Gary did get the wrong train when he came here.
I did. I'm not bad in I'm not good in the 3D world. But
just in the virtual world.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah. But it's they said the signature of my Asperger's is my extreme interest in justice and fairness and truth.
Right.
And apparently a lot of us have that in common, and we will work for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, to find the truth.
Maybe I should get myself checked out.
Well, yeah.
Right. Or maybe not.
Yeah.
To me, the most interesting part is the list of non-terrestrial officers and possible undisclosed ships. Were any mainstream journalists interested in that?
No, I mean, they all, after the first interview, they they read that and they see, okay, we can ask him about this and that, but they don't go into it like you do. They don't drill down on the detail.
Right.
They just say, oh, so you were looking for UFOs and you found this, and then they gloss over it.
Right. Right.
There's no deep interest really.
Right.
And I apologise to any interviewers that did ask me, because it's so long ago now I can't remember.
Okay. Right. Thank you then, Gary. We're going to go for another break and we'll continue after this.